Okay, picture this. You're in late 15th century France. The printing press has only been around for 20 years, and a trial is underway. Jehan Lavoisier, a lawyer and judge, presides over a crowded courtroom. A child has been badly mauled, their face permanently injured. The community wants justice. It's not just about the attack. In a world where disasters, failed harvests, and disease can be seen as signs of divine displeasure, restoring moral order matters. If the guilty go unpunished, who knows what consequences will follow? The judge studies the accused. He looks at the jacket stretched over 4 legs and a spiral tail. Then he delivers the verdict. A punishment is handed down. The criminal? A pig. Hi, hello, and welcome to another episode of True Crime Culinary, where we look at the intersection of true crime, food history, and quirky moments in between. I am your host, Leah. This weekend, I lost my voice. I'm not sure if you can tell, but we're not on our normal vibe. 'Tis a true tragedy for all. As I sat on my couch, a little bit bored and a little bit sad because my dog genuinely could not understand my squeaks, I looked up funny, quirky crimes to share. Because I have a weak spot for the niche crime of animals that break into human buildings to get food. I used to live on a sanctuary in Namibia where I dealt with many a creature, including baboons and warthogs, who would often break into places or come to say hi for a snack. One such creature in particular, named Peggy Sue the warthog, would break down the door just to get chips. So even though for today's opening story, I led with what I think is a fascinating courtroom adventure, I have to say I couldn't ignore or not talk about the pigs that ended up in pantries looking for snacks, just because I need you to know that that exists in this world. Because for today's topic, we're digging into, did you guess it? Spam. Because I want to know where it's from, who eats it, and why, and I think you're going to be surprised at what I found. So grab your bacon, we're going to dive into this story. Now, when most people think about Spam, they think about canned meat. Maybe they think about the can lurking in the back of the pantry that somehow survives every move because, hey, it never goes bad. But Spam actually started as a business problem. Back in the late 1800s, a man named George Hormel, founded a meatpacking company in Austin, Minnesota. The business grew steadily, but like many meat processors of the era, the company faced challenges. Customers absolutely loved premium cuts like bacon and ham. Competition is good because it means there's an appetite for whatever you're trying to sell. But at some point, that competition is a total bummer because it means it's harder for people to find you in a sea of, in this case, meat packers. This is a sentence I sense gets said very often in Las Vegas. But back to our friend George. He knew that there were many other parts of the pig, specifically pork shoulder, that could be useful. It's perfectly edible, perfectly tasty, but not nearly as popular as ham or bacon. So George kind of mulls on it. His business grows, and then when we fast forward to the 1930s, his son, Jay, I really should have looked up Hormel or Ormel, either way, was looking for ways to turn less desirable cuts into something people would actually buy. And his solution? Basically, grind up the pork shoulder, add some seasoning and sodium nitrate to keep it stable, stick it in a can, seal it, run a naming competition at the company, and voila, I give you Spam. Apparently, the winner of the naming competition got $100, which in today's money is $2,000, which is not too shabby. So one thing I have to admit is that I didn't know that Spam had so few ingredients. I kind of thought it had like 100, but it's relatively pure. The real magic is in the canning. The meat is cooked before it goes into the can. Then once it is sealed, it is heated under pressure. That process kills microorganisms and creates a sterile environment. No oxygen, no bacteria, thus no spoilage until the can is opened. It's basically industrial scale pressure canning. And that's why a can of Spam can sit on a shelf for years and years and it will still be perfectly safe to eat. But at first, Spam was simply another product, kind of just something else in their catalog. And then World War II arrived. This is a theme in a lot of episodes that I've done so far, like in episode 19, The Twinkie Made Me Do It, or episode 32, Fortune Cookies and the Order That Solved the Murder. Dub Dub 2 causes a lot of things to shift because people are super bummed, super broke, and still hungry. So, when the United States entered World War II, feeding troops became a massive logistical challenge. Why, you might ask? Because you need protein to keep people full. Carbs keep them full short term, but then kind of make them angry. You need protein to keep people full and strong. However, famously, fresh meat spoils, and refrigeration wasn't always available, which is kind of the understatement of the century. Because, like, can you imagine a fridge just kind of vibing in the middle of the battlefield? It's not really an option, not to mention that solar power didn't hit the scene until like the 1950s, and electricity is not super reliable when there's like bombs around. So I always have to kind of remind myself of those logistics and situations like that because I am a super emotional creature, but often the logical stuff kind of trips you up most. Soldiers were also constantly moving. So Spam checked all the boxes because it was shelf stable, protein rich, easy to transport, and ready to eat. I am a little like my timbers be shivering at the idea of eating Spam cold, but it was a reality. So Hormel ended up supplying enormous quantities of Spam to Allied forces. Soldiers joked about it relentlessly. Many claimed they ate Spam for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There was a real Spam fatigue. Some troops absolutely hated it. Others grew surprisingly fond of it. But whether they liked it or not, it fed people. And then once the war ended, in some places, Spam became something entirely new. While doing research, I discovered a cold Spam and cream cheese recipe, and may I tell you, I have not recovered from this nightmare. But I wanted to share a few really cool places that Spam has kind of been integrated. Let's start in the land of K-pop demon hunters, Korea. So to understand Spam's popularity there, you have to understand what Korea had been going through. Korea had already endured decades of Japanese occupation by the time World War II rolled in. Then, as part of the end of World War II, because Japan surrendered, the US and the Soviet Union, a democracy and not a democracy, had to agree on how to manage Korea moving forward. So they decide on this like temporary solution to split the country at the 38th parallel. That's how we get North and South Korea. Then in 1950, the Korean War starts, which is basically a 3-year war where North Korea, backed by China and Russia, attacks South Korea, backed by the UN. So in case you didn't know this, which to be fair, I didn't, I had to go look it up just to remind myself, Korea is a giant peninsula. And South Korea is the one that has more water around it because North Korea kind of feeds into the overall continent above it. So when North Korea came in to attack South Korea, it just destroyed everything. Millions of people were displaced. Agriculture was disrupted. Fields became battlefields. Transportation networks were damaged. Food became harder to produce and harder to move. Fresh meat was often expensive or difficult to obtain. And then there were the American military bases. And on those bases was Spam, along with hot dogs, sausages, and other canned foods. People near the bases began incorporating ingredients into Korean cooking. One famous result was, am I going to pronounce this correctly? No. Thus, we enter the judgment-free zone. Budae jjigae, mea culpa Koreans. Often translated to army base stew. I have to admit, when I looked this up, it genuinely looked like a pot. If I'm thinking of the right thing, it's like a big pot of noodles, and then like literally a slice of Spam, hot dogs. So like it's a whole thing. If you've had it before or you want to correct me, I love a correction. Email me at truecrimeculinary@gmail.com. Some other combinations include kind of mixing Spam with kimchi, noodles, and chili paste. So what began as a practical solution eventually became a beloved comfort food. And as South Korea grew wealthier, Spam didn't disappear. Instead, it became associated with celebration. Today, beautifully packaged Spam gift sets are commonly sold around the holidays, like, again, judgment-free zone, Chuseok, and Lunar New Year. So if you have a Korean family you're marrying into and about to meet the parents, don't turn your nose up. If they give you a Spam gift, it's kind of a big deal. I'm just saying. So now let's take a little trip to another watery place, the islands of Hawaii. Spam's journey there followed a very different path. Hawaii had a significant military presence before, during, and after World War II. large quantities of spam moved through the islands. At the same time, wartime rationing and import restrictions on the islands affected access to some foods. And again, spam was affordable, available, and adaptable. Hawaii also had an incredibly diverse community, including native communities, Japanese, Filipino, Chinese, Portuguese, and more. And they found ways to incorporate it into local cuisine. So if you've been to Hawaii, you might have seen my personal favorite and most famous example, spam musubi. 'Tis a wonderful, wonderful treat indeed. It's a slice of grilled spam placed on rice and wrapped in seaweed. And you'll often find it like wrapped in, like plastic wrap and just like stacked. Oh my God, it's so good. And then there's the third place that truthfully I hadn't really thought of, because the only time I ever say the word Guam is when I'm quoting a line from Matilda, where the Wormwoods are trying to get Matilda into the car as they speed to the airport ahead of the speedboat salesman, aka the police. And the mom is like, but we're going on a permanent vacation. And then she goes, I forgot what Matilda says, but then she goes, we're moving to Guam. And literally that's the only time I ever think of the place Guam. If you are there, hello. So if Korea's story is about war and recovery, and Hawaii's is about adaptation, arguably Guam's story is partly about practicality. Guam is a relatively small island in the Pacific. And I had to go check this again, because I was like, I have, that fear of like being in the middle of nowhere. So I don't think I'm like cut out for island life, but I was kind of curious. I was like, wait, where is Guam? It is in the Pacific, but not like where I live, where I can see the Pacific, basically from my driveway. And I'm like, hello, near Pacific. Takes me 6 hours to fly, or like 5 or 6 hours to fly to Hawaii. Guam is further away. It's like Papua New Guinea, Japan, and Philippines Pacific. Again, just kind of orienting you a little bit. So historically, imported foods have played an important role in feeding the population. Why? Because it's hella far from everywhere. To be fair, it is very close, relatively speaking, to, as I mentioned, Japan, New Guinea, etc. But generally speaking, it's kind of out in the Pacific. And you might wonder, how big is it? As I wondered. And I thought, 212 square miles? That sounds kind of big, right? What is the same size as that? And with fascination and horror, I realized that's only slightly bigger than a lake I go to up in the mountains called Lake Tahoe, because I didn't realize that Lake Tahoe, even though like math totally makes sense, but it's 191 square miles. And let me tell you, I have biked around it in like 6 or 7 hours. So that kind of helps me understand what we're dealing with Guam. There's just not a ton of space for the roughly, I think, 200,000 people who live there. Again, so much water everywhere, all the places, every direction. So key takeaway, you probably need some imports. Shelf-stable products have obvious advantages. They travel well, store well, survive storms. And over time, it became woven into local food traditions. And thus I quote, Guam is widely known as the spam capital of the world, consuming on average 16 cans per person annually. 16. Anyway, a unique dish in spam is called kalugin. It's where spam is cut into strips and mixed with lemon juice, onions, and hot peppers, traditionally eaten with flatbread. I just got to reiterate, 16 cans per person. I think I eat 1 can every 16 years, but that's cool. I love that for you. Now, you might be wondering, as I did, how we went from spam meaning a culinary adventure to spam meaning annoying stuff like emails from a person who emailed you and 7 other people to avoid a curse upon their family. And now you have to decide whether you're going to risk it and ignore it, or if you're just going to send it to 7 other people to CYA. And this is where comedy enters the chat. The spam joy was picked up in 1970 by the comedy group Monty Python and aired as a sketch and is set in a restaurant. At that restaurant, every item on the menu contained spam. It was kind of like every name had like one more word of spam. It'd be like egg and spam, spam and spam, 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 and it would just kept going. And so that word kind of kept appearing over and over until it overwhelmed the conversation. So years later, early internet users adopted the term to describe people flooding message boards, chat rooms with repetitive posts. And eventually, the word kind of migrated to email. and suddenly Spam had become Spam. One was canned meat, the other was an unsolicited message from a Nigerian prince. The connection wasn't that the food was bad, the connection was that it was everywhere. Imagine discovering your product has become shorthand for one of humanity's most annoying inventions. But fortunately for Hormel, the food hath survived. Today, Spam remains a surprisingly successful product. There are dozens of varieties. I am shocked to tell you as well. Millions of cans are sold every year. There are festivals dedicated to it. Hawaii hosts the annual Waikiki Spam Jam. Minnesota celebrates its most famous canned export. And despite countless jokes, the product continues to find new fans. Not bad for a solution to a pork shoulder surplus. And as somebody who really believes in using all the things of all the things, I think it's great that it exists and that it can kind of like fill this little niche, salty place in our life. But back to 15th century France. What happened to the pig on trial? He was actually found guilty, marched through town, and publicly executed, I am sad to report. But also, this wasn't some one-off incident. Medieval Europe put a surprising number of animals on trial, from pigs to rats to insects. And the logic was that if a crime had been committed, justice had to be done no matter who or what the culprit was. Kind of back to that overall hierarchy of like people and animals. If an animal did something outside of the hierarchy, kind of violated the hierarchy, it had to be rebalanced and reordered. And so there had to be punishment executed. Fortunately for the pigs from the break-in stories I researched at the top of the show, they were returned home. They probably got a snack. I can confirm that the police reports are very funny because the police officers really did enjoy doing some puns in those reports. So I have to say, if I found a pig in my pantry, I would much rather find an alive one that I could give snacks to than a can of Spam. But when in doubt, make some Spam musubi.
Until next time, stay curious and be careful what's in your cup. Check out our show notes for sources, hit that subscribe button, rate and review the podcast anywhere you listen.